we really get to work, and it's time to actually start colouring our characters. I didn't mention before, but obviously in the illustration I'm using as an example, I have 2 characters, but you know, you can do this with 1 character, you can do it with as many characters as you want. So over here you can see my character Elma the elf already exists because I have already created some illustrations of her from my book. So I have opened this up just so I can use it as a guide for make sure I'm using the right colours. If this is not a character that already exists that you're colouring as you follow this tutorial, then you can just go wild and use your imagination with the colours, and I will show you how to do that. But I will be using the colour picker to make sure I'm getting the right colours from my existing Elma illustration. So have your Photoshop document open in front of you with the layers. As you can see over here, I have my layer with lines on. I have my blue background layer, which can be any colour you want to work with. I like to work with blue instead of white, so I can just so I can really see the edges and the lines and what's going on. And then we've still got our hidden original artwork layer, which actually, if I quickly turn that on, you can actually see the difference in the lines, how clean they are now after I finished cleaning them up. So things are looking much neater already. So let's get going with the colouring. So what we want to do is, there's a couple of ways to do this actually, and I will show you both. First of all, go to your layers and make sure you're underneath your lines layer, because you want to hide all of your colours underneath the lines layer. We are going to create a separate colour fill layer for each of the colours that we use in the illustration. It will make sense as we go. So for example, let's start with Elma, my female elf. Because I have more than 1 character and it will get confusing with lots of layers, I am going to create a group by clicking on create a new group icon here, call it Elma, and I will put all of my colour layers and shadow and highlight layers for Elma in that folder, so that I can close that and keep everything nice and neat. You can do the same if you are going to have more than 1 character in your illustration, or you don't need to put them in a folder at all. So then let's start with the skin. So click here on the icon down here for the fill and adjustment layers, and you want to choose solid colour. So it's going to let us choose a colour from the colour picker. You can click around, you can play here with the slider, and you can find the skin tone that you want for your character. I am going to use my picker and I am going to pick Elma's skin tone from this illustration. Now I need to make sure I get somewhere in the middle because there is some highlights and some shadows on the skin over there. So that's about right for my skin tone. So I'm going to choose that colour, say OK, and then over here just double click the colour fill to where it says the name, and rename it so I know that is her skin. Now as you can see, it's filled our whole illustration with that colour, which we don't want. So what we need to do is come over here. Now you can see your skin colour there, and attached to it here you can see the layer mask. Basically on this layer mask, whatever is white will be filled with that colour, whatever is black will not be filled with that colour, and whatever is somewhere in between, a grey, will have a transparency version of that colour. So at the moment it's all white, so it's all filled in. So I am going to actually Command A to select the entire canvas, and then delete to completely delete the colour from that layer. And as you can see now, it's completely black and there is none of that colour on there. So we can choose our brush tool. In fact, before we do that, let's zoom in a bit so that we are closer up. This is our first way of doing it, of making the colour mask. So we choose our brush tool, and then up here, go to your brush selection and choose I'll go into my general brushes folder and choose a hard round brush. I want the size of it to be small enough to handle, to not go over the edges. I want the hardness to be 100% because I don't want any blurring around the edges. And at the moment I want the opacity to be 100% too, because I just want to colour this in with solid colour. So I have my brush, make sure that the foreground colour is white, because whatever I colour on the illustration in white will now become the colour of that colour mask, which is our skin colour. And then literally just start drawing on the illustration as if it were a piece of paper that I'm colouring in. Now, I'm not worried too much about going over the edges where there is an item of clothing, for example, because I'll be colouring over that. So up here, I'll be colouring over that with a hat. So I will neaten it up and make sure that I'm not going over the edges when I come to do the hat. So colour her face in. And that is actually, I believe, all that we can see on my Elma the elf, because the rest of her, as I can see in my other illustration, is covered up with clothing because it's winter and she needs to keep warm. So there we have it. That is her skin coloured in. Next, I'm going to do the hair. Oh, and by the way, next stage of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to add some shadow and some highlights and stuff to make it all kind of look a bit better. So next, let's do the hair, and this time we will do it a slightly different way. We're going to come up here and use our lasso tool. So that's this little icon here, and I'm actually going to hold down with my trackpad and drag around the edge of her hair. Da, da, da. Again, it doesn't matter if I go over the hat because I will be colouring the hat over the top of this. So I want to come up here and make sure that I have this little selection thing on the second one, which means that if I do another selection, it will add it on to my current selection rather than doing it instead of my current selection. So I can do as many selections as I want and it will just keep adding them on. So that is all that is visible of her hair, but actually her eyebrows need to be the same colour. So I'm just going to add those onto the selection. So now I have selected all the areas that I want to be coloured, the colour of her hair. I'm going to come down here in the layers window and again select fill or adjustment layer. I'm going to choose solid colour to create a new layer. It's automatically picked up black and coloured in only, this time instead of filling the whole screen, it has only filled in the bit that I selected with the lasso tool. So now I can either mess around here with different colours for her hair, and it's kind of better this way because it allows me to see what it looks like on the illustration. But as before, I'm using my guide over here, so I am going to just come over here, use my colour picker to pick the purple out of the illustration that I did previously. I'm going to say OK, and then I'm going to come over here to the layers palette and rename that layer to hair, because trust me, once your illustration is getting closer to complete, you'll have so many layers, it's kind of hard to keep track of what's what, so you want to name them. Now, I missed a little bit there when I was using the lasso tool, so I'm going to come over, get my paintbrush, make sure this adjustment layer here is selected on the hair layer, and then come over and I can fill that in. And by the way, say I went wrong and I did a splodge on her face and I wanted to get rid of it, you can either use the eraser tool, or you can just come down here, stay on the brush tool, but reverse the colours so that black is your foreground colour, and then paint over it, because anything you paint in black, remember, will actually erase the colour from that layer. So the cool thing about this, about using layers like this to colour in illustration, is that once you have your layer there and you've coloured in the bits that you want to colour in with that colour, you can come in and adjust them at any time. So say later on I decided actually I want her to have pink hair, I can just double click on that purple and change it pink, red, whatever I want to change it to. I can change any colour. I could change her clothes for another colour for another illustration further down the line. Or say you're making like an illustration for a greeting card or whatever, or you're creating a character and you want to give for a client, and you want to give your client options. You can just create loads of different versions with different colours and save them all as JPEGs, show them to your client, and you've got all of the layers there in your PSD file, so it's super easy to change it. But I'm going to cancel that because her hair needs to be purple. Okay, so I have skin and I have hair. It's looking very basic at the moment, but this is how we build it up until we have all our base colours in. But then we do want to add some details. So as you can see over here in my other illustration, you can't really see too well in her hair because she's looking sideways and there's not much of it showing, but you can kind of see on her cape. I like to, instead of just having one flat colour, I like to actually layer the colours up a little bit, and this is even before I go into shading and highlights. I think it kind of makes it look a bit more magical and a bit more cool if it's not just one flat colour, although one flat colour might work really well for your style. I mean, it works for comics, it works for a lot of illustrations and a lot of kids' books illustrations. But for me, I kind of like having these tones. So you see like where it's purple, it's got pinky tones in it and bluey tones in it. And where there's blue, it's got the purple tones and the greeny tones. So I'll just show you quickly how I do that. Let's see. No, let's colour her cape in and then we can do it on that layer because there's not really enough of her hair to show you with. And I know that it looks like her cape and her boots are the same colour as her hair, but I'm going to do them on a separate layer because if I came in later, like I was saying before, and wanted to change the colour of her cape but keep the colour of her hair, if they were using the same fill layer, then it would change both of them. So it's just less complicated to have them on separate layers. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool again and I'm just going to draw around the bits of her cape that I want to be purple. I'm not going to worry about the part where the fur will be because I will do that on another layer over the top. And there we go. So now I'm going to choose solid colour and I'm going to come over here and pick the purple, the main purple from her cape in my previous illustration. I'm going to rename that layer cape. Oh, try. Okay, so what I am going to do is create another layer on top of that with more of a pinky. No, let's choose more of a pinky colour, bright pink colour. Again, I'm going to Command A to select the entire canvas and then come over here and choose the layer mask there and delete to turn that black and take all the colour off that layer. And now I can just paint wherever I want to put that pink. But instead of using a round hard brush, I'm going to actually zoom in a bit more so I can show you properly. What we want to do is select a different brush instead of the hard brown brush. I'm actually going to use a watercolour brush. These particular watercolour brushes I just downloaded from the Adobe website because I subscribe to get access to be able to use all of the Adobe CC suite, including Photoshop and Illustrator, which I use for making vector illustrations, and InDesign, which I use for all my book layouts and things. So I find it really handy to do the monthly subscription, and you get like loads of stuff that you can use for free, including brushes. So you can, I used to just go and buy brushes separately that people have made, and you can do that too. There are loads of great watercolor brushes out there. Experiment, I would say, experiment. Use watercolor brushes to color your illustrations. I do the base with, as you saw, the hard brown brushes, but I love using watercolor brushes if I'm doing shading, if I'm adding little effects for backgrounds, which you'll see in other tutorials, because they just add this lovely well, it does what it says on the tin. It gives it the effect of a watercolour painting, really. So as you can see over here in my watercolour brush folder, we have lots of different options for brushes, and it's just a case of experimenting, really, with the brushes to see what you like. So because I want to add a bit of just a bit of a colour effect onto her coat, I'm going to go for something like this Kyle's Real Watercolour 500 Giant Brush Tool. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do, I'm zoomed in, I want to make this smaller so I can actually see my other illustration. What I am going to do is open up my brushes window. So window, brushes. And you can see over here, if you click on brush settings, it will give you the settings options for the current brush that you are using. Hold on a minute, I've disappeared. Hold on one second. Let me just make sure my little window stays on top. There we go. Okay, back to the brushes. So you've got the brush settings here for the current brush that you've selected, which in my case right now is the watercolor brush. There are some different settings set here by default that come with the brush. I'm going to go ahead and change them, so they might be quite good settings actually by looking at them. At the bottom there, it gives you a little preview of what that brush would look like if you used it. So you can go over onto your canvas and just literally drag the brush around. Like, how cool does that look? Obviously not all over her face, but it's kind of a cool effect. So I might just actually leave it as it is. So now I need to get rid of that. I'm going to open up my history layer. And I can just click back to get rid of those splatters. Okay, so back to the layers panel. And as we can see, our pink layer here. What we want to do, actually, let me show you first. So say I want to add some pink to her cape. I'm going to take the opacity down because I want to make a subtle effect, so maybe to about 43. And I'm going to just do like a little bit of, just drag it around a bit. And also add a little bit of pink to her cape. But as you can see over here, it's gone over the edge of the cape. I want to make sure that any effects I add here stick only on top of the cape. On top of the cape layer colour. So to do that, I come over here and make sure that let me just call it cape pink. Make sure that my cape pink layer is above my cape layer, and then holding down the command key, the alt, which is now called option key, I hover between the layers, and when that little icon with the square and the arrow comes up, I click, and it attaches that layer, the pink layer, to the cape layer. I will find out the technical name for doing that for you. It attaches them together so that anything I draw on that layer now will only show up on top of the layer it's attached to. So you see it's not showing any pink over the edges anymore, which is quite cool and which will come in really useful later when we're doing some shading and some highlights as well. So now if I add another layer here underneath the pink layer, it will automatically be attached. So I want to add like a bit of a bluer effect, so I'm going to go solid color. You see now it's just actually colouring the entire area of the cape layer, which we don't want, but we can, there we go, dark blue, but we know we can do Command A to select the entire canvas, click over here on the layer mask on the white, and then delete to delete all of that. I've still got my watercolour brush selected, and I've got that layer mask with the blue selected, so I'm going to do the same as I did with the pink, just add a little bit of blue there to the cape layer. So you can already see that it's becoming a little bit more dynamic. If I zoom out, rather than just that flat purple, we now have some different colours going on, so it's kind of building up the purple. And and I can play with how much pink there is, I can play with how much blue there is, I can turn this around so that I've got black selected and take some of that blue away if I feel like it's a bit much. And this is how it's just as if you're painting on a piece of paper or canvas, you know, you just literally play. But being digital, you've got so much more leeway to make mistakes and to experiment. So that's pretty cool. I mean, I could add more highlight colours on there. I could add some purple, sorry, not purple, some yellow, some whatever. But for now, I'm going to leave it at that because I want to quickly do the fur layer on top of the cape just to give you kind of the finished effect. And then I'm going to go and zoom through and complete the other clothing layers and then come back to you because it will take forever if I actually show you doing them all. So let's quickly use the lasso tool and let's zoom around and select the fur layer. So with some layers it gets a little bit trickier because they might be more complicated shapes like this fur. They might be small in size. You can zoom in. It doesn't matter if you don't select it all perfectly because you can use the eraser tool obviously to get rid of anything that you don't want, and you can use the paintbrush tool to add on extra. So I'm going right around the fur of her cape only at the moment. I probably will do the same layer later. I'll add on the fur from trim around her hat and around her dress because I know they're all going to be the same colour, and it actually is easier just to do it once rather than to have several layers with the same colour. But just for the purposes of showing you for now, I'm just going to do it for the trim of her cape. Right, there we go. I've selected all of that. I've missed a few bits, but that's fine because I'll fill them in. I'm going to create a new layer over here on the top, a new solid colour layer, which I will select white. Now I'm going to actually just put in the hex code for white, which is 6Fs. So we can see that fur layer is now filled with white. As you can see where I went over the edges, guys, it's not very neat. So I can click on the, make sure I'm clicked on the layer mask over there. I've got my eraser and I can easily just, if it's black, it's going to colour in when you've got the eraser. If it's white, it's going to erase. So I can select the eraser, go around and erase where I went over the edges. And there we go. Oh, I'm actually erasing bits I don't want to erase now, but that's all right because I'll next go back and fill them in. What I tend to do is use my eraser for fill and for erasing, so I can keep it on a hard round brush, and then I keep my paintbrush tool on a watercolor brush, so I don't have to keep switching the brush, because you can fill and erase with both the paintbrush and the eraser, just depending on whether you have black or white selected. I kind of find it easier to just do that. So now I've done that, you see I can switch so that black is my foreground colour, and I can actually come and fill in the bits that I missed where there were gaps in using my lasso tool. I just find it quicker to do it this way with the lasso tool and then amending it with the brush or the eraser than it is to fill in the whole thing using the brush or eraser, but you can do that. So there we go, I've filled in my fur. Now I want to add some adjustment layers on top of that. So you might not be able to tell, but if you look in the fur over here, there are some different colours, like the fur isn't pure white. I used some pink and some yellow, and I think I even used a bit of green and blue to make up that fur colour. So I'm going to do that over here. Let me just, I've missed another little bit, there we go. I can neaten it all up later. So what I want to do is create another solid colour layer, and I'm going to choose, let's go with like a green to start with. Okay, I'm going to select all, Command A. I'm going to make sure I have the layer mask selected over there and delete. Oh, it only works if white is the foreground colour and black is the background colour. delete to get rid of that. I'm going to choose my brush tool, and what I'm going to do is hold down Option, hover between these layers, and attach that adjustment layer on top of the, let's call this fur, on top of the fur layer. And then I'll make sure I have the layer mask for that green adjustment layer. It's a bit of a sickly green. Make sure I've got the layer mask for that selected. Over here, make sure I am on my brush tool, which still has the settings for that watercolor brush that I used before. And then I will just, like, over here on the fur layer, I will just dab some green here and there. Give it just a bit of an interesting effect. If I think that it looks a bit much, I can just reduce the opacity of that layer, or I can switch so that I have black selected and then use that as an eraser to erase some of it. Now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to create another layer with a bit of a pink. Let's go for pink. Command A, select layer mask and delete, and then use our brush tool to add some pink into the fur, just randomly, you know, like, just be creative, just so that that fur's not all white. And again, it will change when we come to do the shading later. And lastly, I think I'm just going to add a yellow. Let's add a soft yellow to that fur. There we go. Love it. So it's funny, isn't it? Because the overall effect is that it still looks kind of white, but it's kind of not. So that's pretty cool. Because no colour is really just one colour. See, now that cape looks a bit more dynamic now that it's made up of, you know, with a few different colours in there. So just play and have fun with it. So I am going to go and fill in the rest of her clothes in the same way. So I will literally create the colour of the boots and the dress and her top and her gloves and her hat and all of that in exactly the same way that I have just shown you with the cape and with her skin. And then I will be back to show you the effect and also to add on some details like her eyes and the dots on the hat. And after that, we're going to move on to adding some shadows and highlights. Okay, so now you can see I have repeated that process for all her different clothing layers, and she's nearly there. There's still work to do, but she's getting there. So you can see that I added in the base colours and then some highlight colours for each of those layers. I've left a couple of things that I just wanted to show you. Oh, if you have a look over here in my layers panel, you can see that in my Elma folder, I now have loads of layers, which is why I said to you to keep them in folders if you have more than one character. So I can just close that when I'm working on my other character, Ember over there, who I will do afterwards. So in here we have the skin layer, and I forgot to connect. This is actually the little rosy cheeks here. So I can rename any of them. This blue is actually, I have used it for her dress, hat and tights and gloves, because I know I'm going to keep them that colour. I'm not going to be changing the colour because I've already completed my book and I'm set on that. So it was just easier for me to put them all on one layer, and then attached to that you can see the white, which is, if I turn it off and on, you'll see that's the stripes on her tights. And then the pink little highlight on all the blue clothes, the yellow highlight on the blue clothes. Here we see her top underneath the cape there, which has some purple and yellow highlights on it. Her hair, which you watched me colour, I have added some blue and pink highlights to that just to jazz it up a little bit. The cape and boots I have put on the same layer again, because I know I'm not changing those colours, but I would recommend you put everything on different layers if it's an illustration you're just doing, and you may want to change the colours in the future. I've added some highlights of blue, pink and yellow to those layers. I try and keep my colour tones similar across the different layers, because it just gives a nice feel to the whole illustration then if we do that. Then here's the fur layer, which I have applied to all the different fur across all of her clothes. And as you can see, there's some pink, yellow and green highlights going on there. And then finally we have the earrings and the little bell on her hat layer with just some kind of reddish highlights to it. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you. One thing I need to add onto the hat layer is these dots, which you can see here, the little dots on her hat. So as I already, if I scroll down to the layer, my blue layer, oh, and you might notice I've changed the background colour to white just because the blue of her clothes was kind of clashing with it, and I like to have some contrast so I can see what I'm doing. So I've changed that to white now. Feel free to adjust your background colour as you go, just so you've got some contrast with the colouring that you're doing, and you can see whether you've gone over the edges and what's going on. So I come back down to the blue clothing layer, which is her dress, hat and tights. And I want to add some white spots onto her hat. Now I already have the white layer here, which I used for the stripes on her tights. So I can literally just select the layer mask of the white and I can use that. What I'm going to do is actually use the eraser to paint the dots, because the eraser is already a round hard dot. Actually it's a soft dot, but I'll make it hard by putting the hardness up to 100%. And I will take the size of that dot down a little bit, and then I'm going to come over to, if I can find, I'm going to open our brushes window, and in the brush settings for this white dot, I'm going to put up the size jitter, and so that every time I do a dot it will change the size of it. And then I'm just going to make sure I've got this one visible, because I want to keep it kind of similar, even though the dots will be in different places, which I don't mind. It's a kid's book, you know, it's cool. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to make sure the opacity of my brush is 100%. Make sure I have white selected. So, oh no, make sure I've got black selected because I'm on the eraser. So black will paint and white will erase. And then I can just literally over here just add some dots onto her hat, and it's varying the size. I might want to vary the size a bit more. So we have a couple of smaller ones. Oh, that's a huge one. Maybe a bit big. So I'm going to make it a bit smaller and just do a couple of smaller ones. And there we have it. Now they look kind of cool. Like some of them have this pinkish and yellowish tinge over the top, because if I come back to my layers, you'll see that in the layer we've painted those on, which is here, on top of that we do have some adjustment layers with the pink and the yellow over the blue. So I've put the white underneath those so that that pink and yellow is also coming on top of the white. Now those dots are a little bit too opaque, so I want to take the opacity down a little bit and make them slightly transparent. So I'm just going to take the opacity of that whole white layer down just a touch, and there we go. They look much more subtle now. So that was one thing I wanted to save to show you, and the other thing, I'm going to actually close this one now. I don't need that for reference anymore. The other thing I wanted to show you was her eyes. So I haven't done her eyes yet. I was saving it. I have opened here and I've one of the illustrations of Elma that I have done, which comes later in the book, so that you can see her eyes. So as you can see, they are kind of pinky and bluey. It is the same process that we have done for the other layers, but I wanted to show you how I get that light effect on them as well. So let's start by going to the very top of our Elma folder and drawing around her eyes with the lasso tool. Da, 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 da. And then we can create a new white fill layer for her eyes I have gone over the edge a little bit, so let me get my erase tool, and now I need to remember to actually turn off the shape dynamics. I don't want the size of the eraser tool to keep jumping while I'm trying to erase things. So make sure I've got the layer mask for her eyes selected, and oh, nope, I need to make sure that I've got white as the foreground if I am erasing. There we go. So now we have the white for her eyes. I'm going to call this layer eyes, using lots of imagination there. So then next we want to draw around her irises. You can do the whole thing because we'll do the pupil over the top, so that doesn't matter. There we go. Now the irises are a blue and a pink, so I'm going to start with the blue, and I will select the same blue that I used before. And that's fine, I can actually just leave that exactly as it is, fill the whole thing with blue, and then I'm going to select the pink and another layer on top. I'm going to delete all of that. Oh, and I have to remember over here to attach the blue and the pink on top of the eye layer because I only wanted to sharpen those. So I'll make that pink a bit brighter. Right, so what I want to do with the pink is I want to actually get a soft, let me go to my general brushes, a soft round brush. It's on 76%, let's try that, and let's just literally paint on there with that. It's only going to be that little bit that shows because we're going to hide the rest of the pupil. Perfect. Now, of course, because this is attached to the white layer of her eyes as well, it has actually painted over the white, which we don't want. So we will come back to our eraser tool and just erase that part. Simples. Okay, so then we want to colour the pupil in black. Hidden myself behind the layers. Hi. We want to colour the pupils in black, so let's select around using the lasso tool. Let's select around the shape where the pupils will be. Dun, dun, dun. And then we just want to add one more layer, solid colour, and make it black, which hex code is all the zeros. Okay, so let's attach that to the eyes. So we have some eyes. What we want to do to bring it to life a little bit is add this little white reflection kind of circle of colour, which I think looks kind of cool. So up here in the marquee tool, let's select the elliptical marquee tool, and you just want to drag a little circle basically. I'm going to move that over a little bit. So I want it half, I can use the keys to shift it. Half across the pupil and half across the colour kind of works quite well. And what I'm going to do is just create another colour layer, make it white. Now you can see that we have the line of the pupil showing through because this layer is down below the lines layer. So we're actually going to drag that right up on top of the lines layer. So it will be at the top. Okay, so now I've put that layer at the top of our layers list so that's above the lines. What we want to do is to reduce the opacity of it a bit. We're looking at this dot down here on her eyes. The reflection, the light effect. So let's reduce the opacity of our dot up here to around 50%. And then we're going to get our eraser and we are going to reduce the hardness to about 40%. Make sure you are on the mask for the eye. The size of my brush is about right, it's 90 pixels, but it depends on the size of your document. So what I'm going to do is reduce the opacity of the eraser to about 50 or just below, and then on that layer of the light on her eye, you want to just hover over the edge of it and click the eraser maybe just once, and then it just takes some of that light out. And as you can see, that gives us the effect of having one of those kind of light reflections on her eye now. So we want to repeat that for the other eye. So what I'm actually going to do is let me think. I'm going to duplicate this layer by grabbing it and dragging it down onto the new layer icon at the bottom, and that just completely duplicates the layer. And then using my move tool, I'm going to Command T, which gives us transform on the circle of the eye, and I'm going to use my little arrow keys. I'm losing all my words today. Use my arrow keys on my keyboard, which is a bit of a slow process, but it works. And I'm just going to move that second duplicated circle of light over to the other eye to a similar position. Enter, and there you can see, move it back a bit. You can see we now have those light circle reflection-y thingies on both eyes, which just, like, I always think it brings the character to life a little bit. I have a little bit of tidying up to do on her. I can see that like, for example, here I've missed a little bit on the sleeve and on the cape. I will go through and tidy up and erase bits where I've gone over the edges, and sort out those things. And then in the next section, we're going to move on to doing shading and highlights, and that will be it for this character. So I hope you're following along with your characters, and I'm excited to see them.